Grey Gardens is part of a Scottish-wide festival of architecture for the year 2016, this year being the International Year of Innovation, Architecture and Design. Dundee is a city evolving with its architecture and town planning at this moment in time. DCA was a part of an initial phase of the cultural redevelopment, cultural renaissance of the city. Grey Gardens is the title of a movie from the 1970s, but it was the evocative nature of those two words together for this exhibition, an exhibition exploring concrete forms in built environments, in natural landscapes. We have scale models of important pieces of architecture that were produced in Scotland from the mid-1950s through to the mid-1970s. I was really interested that David Harding, the Newtown artist of Glenrothes, would go on to establish the environmental art course at Glasgow School of Art, and that's a course that Martin Boyce and Neville Ray both graduated from. So there is this sense of timelines, connections that runs through the exhibition. DCA is a building by Richard Murphy. It's important to acknowledge that Richard Murphy was influenced by Carlo Scarpa in a similar way to how Martin Boyce found influence in Scarpa when he was developing an exhibition curated by DCA for the Venice Biennale and the culmination of DCA's 10th anniversary. And the sublime Italian photographer Guido Guidi, we have over 20 of his photographs of the Tomb of Bryon. So situating them in this Murphy building for this Festival of Architecture kind of felt right.
I went to Glenrothes in 1968. There was an advert in the Scotsman for an artist to work with the Development Corporation architects and planners and engineers to, and this is a quote, to contribute to the external built environment of the town. And the work ranges from sculptural objects to later on more kind of conceptual works. Only one of which was made for the town centre in Glenrothes, because all the other works were made for the neighbourhoods where people lived, so all over the town. And they range from abstractions to kind of literal decorative works. I also got involved with the engineers on the wing walls of underpasses, and then because they were responsible for all the paving in the town, I worked with them to bring contemporary Scottish poetry. I took a verse or a poem from short poems from Douglas Young, Goodser Smith, McDermott, and cast paving slabs with these poems on them. And I put them at telephone kiosks and bus stops, places where people waited, you know, and looked down, they would have a poem to read. And then latterly, because Alan Bold, the poet, had come to live and work in Glenrothes as part of a scheme that we had set up, Alan and I collaborated together on a number of poems, particularly, which you see in the exhibition, the Path poem. I came across this desire line, which is where people walk across the grass instead of walking at right angles, and I used to pave these. And so with this particular one, there were 90 slabs it was going to take to get from one end to the other. So I said to Alan, could you write a poem, half of which will be read one word per slab on the way to the shops, and the other half would be read on the way back from the shops. So the Path poem is the major work that I did with Alan Bold.
We're in the show with a video piece and some related prints and a model which have come out of our response to a building in Ayrshire called Port Murray. And the building is by Peter Wormsley and is currently under threat of demolition.
Why we're interested in the building, we've known about the building for a long time, perhaps about 20, 25 years. And we've went to visit it now and again when we're down in Ayrshire, in that part of the world. And then recently we discovered, just towards the end of the year, last year, that it was going to be demolished. We made some inquiries. Is there any way it could be saved or kept in kind of situ? And it seems that's impossible. So we contacted the owner and we've come up with the proposal that it be moved, deconstructed, and moved to another location. And so that's what the video is part of this response, showing it's because the location, its situation is very, very, it's part of the building's kind of integrity itself, part of the building was made for that site, and moving it sort of compromises that. So part of the filming it is to show that its relationship to its situation. But the process is that we are still trying to kind of find a way to deconstruct it bit by bit, dismantle it and move it to another location.
I guess there's a kind of absurdity in trying to move a building from one place to another, but this, the building is significant and the architect is significant. His other buildings across the country are listed, and it just seems shocking that it's been able to kind of come to this, that it's about to possibly be destroyed. And although obviously we can't save the house in the way, on that site, which would be the ideal scenario, then it's, as a response, how can we do something with that space that makes it into something new, makes it into something else. So Wormsley himself said that when his building had been criticised for being more like, he was more concerned with sculpture. It was more like sculpture than an actual than architecture. And he said, well, why can't a building be both, kind of not be both architecture and kind of sculpture? And when we saw the building, we got access to the inside of it with no belongings there, with this kind of empty space. The kind of sculptural qualities of it are incredible. Sculptural spatial qualities are incredible. The way it's a very simple building, interconnecting kind of set of rectangles, but it's also very complex the way they connect, and every time you go, the kind of relationship, not only the situation, but these interconnecting kind of spaces within the building are kind of remarkable. So we are thinking of, we're seeing it very much as sculpture.
Well, the whole show is about Scottish artists that are working with architecture and concrete in different ways. And the particular part that I'm showing in the show is about a garden in Mexico that is by Edward James. And he was very interested in plants, and he built this very impressive garden that originally was going to be an orchid garden that turned into a concrete orchid garden, if you will. And I am showing photographs of this garden. So originally he planted, like, I don't know, I'm not entirely sure how many, we'd have to ask the gardener, but I think it was something like 10,000 orchids, and there was a freak frost, and so all the orchids died. And this place, which is San Luis Potosí, he decided that the only way to keep his orchids from falling apart was to work with Plutarco, who does the casts, and together they worked and they built the concrete garden. The place where the garden is in the middle of the jungle, and it's really, really lush. It's very surreal. He has, in the time that he was setting up the garden, he has worked also with surreal artists, and so I wouldn't go so far as to say that there's influences from the other artists, but maybe there's influences through contact. So when you're in the garden, you really get a feeling of exploration, fantasy, surrealism, things out of the realm of possibilities. So it's almost like you've been put inside an Escher drawing and you've been let loose, or somehow you entered into Alice in Wonderland's back door or something, and you're just let loose in this wonderful jungle of concrete structures and plants.